Joseph Miller got in before sunrise, pulled on worn-out gloves, and walked the halls with the calm of someone who knows every nail in the school. No one knew when he'd started there. They only knew that if a hinge squeaked or the heater quit, he showed up without being called. Teachers just gave a nod, students filed past, and he moved on like part of the building itself, every bit as vital as the beams. That Monday, the smell of floor cleaner still hung in the air when Miller pushed open the auditorium doors. The creak echoed, but only the sparrows heard it. Then he swept in long, even strokes, as if every line were sketching a thought. His bent back betrayed years of work. His neutral face belonged to someone who'd learned to hide his stories. On his way to the teacher's lounge, he crossed paths with a few students. "Morning, Joseph Miller," ventured Oliver, a scrawny ninth grader who watched him with curiosity. The janitor answered with a quick nod and kept going. Running feet, laughter, and slamming doors filled the morning. Miller swapped out a doorknob, checked breakers, restocked soap in the bathrooms, same rhythm as always. Around noon, though, a different sound made him stop. A door flung wide, laughter way too loud for class time. He paused on the threshold, suddenly visible where he'd been invisible, and let his eyes sweep the room, sensing that behind the commotion something new was taking shape. Class had barely started when the new math teacher, Chloe Davis, took over the blackboard. She talked fast, threw numbers up like riddles, and expected everyone to keep up. A student dared to ask a question. The answer came sharp, edging on mockery. Right then the door creaked and Joseph Miller appeared in the hall. "Well, Joseph Miller," she mocked, "try to keep up too." Some kids laughed. He glanced at the problem, gave a slight nod, and moved on in silence. The laughter wilted, but Oliver caught a strange spark in those eyes, something that didn't match a janitor's uniform. That afternoon, with the building nearly empty, Oliver came back for the jacket he'd forgotten. The same door stood ajar. Inside, Joseph Miller faced the board, chalk between his fingers. No audience, no rush. He studied the equation for a second, then wrote. Quick, steady strokes, no hesitation. When he finished, he checked his work, wiped it all off with the eraser, and set down the chalk as if nothing had happened. Turning, he found Oliver frozen in the doorway. "Your jacket," he said calmly. Oliver grabbed it and wanted to ask something, but the words wouldn't come. Miller tipped his head in an almost courteous gesture and vanished down the hall. The smell of freshly erased chalk lingered, along with the certainty that under that gray apron was someone the school still didn't know. Next morning everything sounded the same. Dull sky, hallway chatter buzzing, the steady roll of the cleaning cart. Joseph Miller moved unhurriedly, rag over his shoulder, eyes alert, as if every corner of the school whispered secrets to him. Oliver, leaning against his locker, watched every move. The image of the janitor at the board the day before wouldn't leave his mind. There was a firmness in the way he'd held the chalk, something that blew up the label, "Just an employee." The bell rang and 9A took their seats for third period. Notebooks lined up, stomachs tight. Chloe Davis walked in, heels clicking, voice straight to the point. "Today's challenge is the real thing," she warned. She turned and filled the board with numbers that seemed to multiply with every stroke. Oliver pretended to copy, but his mind wandered. If Joseph Miller showed up, maybe he'd solve it in a heartbeat, or reveal the source of that calm. "Who's willing to try?" she asked. A few hands went up, hesitant. The first volunteer stumbled over his own words before getting past the second line. Davis cut him off, shook her head, and ordered another attempt. Silence thickened. Oliver felt the weight of the room, every student praying not to be called. He drummed his pencil, trying to crack the puzzle on the board while chasing another, bigger one. What story made a janitor master complex formulas out of everyone's sight? When the handle turned, no one noticed the door's quiet swing. In Miller's hands, the old metal bucket rocked, damp rag inside, same as ever. He only meant to empty the wastebasket, yet his appearance ricocheted around the room. Ms. Davis lifted her chin, an unreadable glint in her eyes, and called out, "Too sweet to be real." "Mr. Miller, what a coincidence. Maybe you'd like to crack our problem." Laughter rippled through the desks like a light current. Oliver froze. Miller stopped at the threshold, let his eyes move from the board to the teacher and then to the semicircle of curious faces. Silence settled, heavy. Only then did he step in, slowly. He placed bucket and rag on the floor, picked up the chalk on the substitute's desk, and faced the dark green board. No one dared look away. His hand moved, steady, rhythmic, sure of every stroke. Voices vanished until only the class's held breath remained. Even Davis didn't break the tension. White lines unfolded, unraveling the riddle until the last dot was in place. He set the chalk back, stepped away to check the result, and gave the teacher a brief nod. "Sorry to interrupt." Then he grabbed the bucket, picked up the rag, and left through the same doorway, leaving behind the question no one needed to voice. Who, after all, was Mr. Miller? For a moment, time stopped. Ms. Davis stood stiff before the board, eyes fixed on the fresh equation, lips parted but silent. A whisper broke the hush at the back. "Was it right?" "Looked right," another answered, afraid of being heard. Oliver kept sitting there, heart racing. The clarity he knew was back, but this time the whole class had seen it. A soft snap broke the hush, the click of a camera. Then another, then several more. Within minutes, the photo was on everyone's phones. The problem solved, Mr. Miller beside it, face calm, doing something no one had expected. The bell marked the end of class, but nobody bolted for the hallway. Where chatter usually exploded, a heavy silence settled. Small groups whispered, others swiped through their screens, staring at the image, trying to catch whatever they'd missed. Oliver was still at his desk when a classmate walked over, eyes locked on the video. "Did you see how calm he was? Like it was just routine." "I know," Oliver muttered. "He did the same thing yesterday with no one around." "Seriously?" Oliver told him what he'd seen, Miller alone, scribbling on the board, wiping it off right after, like he was testing something he didn't want to leave behind. The other kid listened without blinking. It hadn't been random. Right after the 8 o'clock bell, the phone pic was already flying through school group chats. In it, Mr. Miller, gray coveralls speckled with paint, was working an equation on the board with the ease of someone practicing an old habit. The caption jabbed at their egos. "The janitor who knows more math than the whole class." Laughter echoed down the halls. Some people, though, kept quiet, intrigued. Hours later, the teacher's lounge turned into a whisper hub. Ms. Davis flipped through her notebook without reading while two colleagues traded looks that mixed guilt with fascination. Even the principal, leaning in the doorway, kept zooming in on the janitor's calm face on his phone. "Is it edited?" someone asked. "Doesn't look like it," another said, pointing at the neatly lined-up numbers. The line landed heavy on Davis. No one was blaming her, but she got the point. Yesterday she'd felt in charge of the subject. Today she learned that down in the basement there was someone solving the problems she was still writing for tests. The next morning, Oliver bumped into Miller in a disinfectant-smelling hallway. "Morning," he said, testing the waters. "Morning, Oliver," the janitor replied, voice low and steady. "People are talking a lot about you." Miller's mouth twitched into a small smile. "I figured." Oliver wanted to know more, but the gentle pat on his shoulder said some answers get written without an audience. You just have to catch the board before the chalk is wiped away. In the next math class, the air felt heavier than the chalk dust on the board. Desks creaked at the slightest movement. Notebooks turned pages slowly, like nobody wanted to make a sound. Eyes kept drifting to the doorway, waiting for Mr. Miller to stroll in with a mop and bucket he never showed. Ms. Davis entered, but her steps wobbled. She solved functions, set up a linear system, tossed out questions in an almost mechanical tone. The voice that used to be firm now faded and came back like a radio hunting for a station. When a student stumbled on a calculation, she skipped her usual sarcasm. She just gave a quick nod. Near the end, Oliver slowly raised his hand, knowing everyone was watching. "Can I ask something?" Ms. Davis took a breath. "Yes, Oliver. Did you know Mr. Miller used to be a math teacher?" A buzz shot through the rows. The chalk froze mid-air. She blinked before answering, "No, I had no idea." Oliver dropped the fact like snapping the centerpiece into a puzzle. "Looks like he understands equations better than we do." The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. When the bell rang, little knots of students formed in the hall. Between guesses about old schools, life choices, and some obscure event, the man with the broom started to look like someone hiding numbers under his apron, and maybe stories more tangled than any equation in the book. Thursday dawned with a buzz that wasn't coming from the lights. In the courtyard, laughs held a secret. In the hallways, phones lit up for seconds, playing the same clip. Mr. Miller at the board, cracking the equation that had flattened half of 9A. Posted the night before, it had thousands of views before first period. The fever jumped the walls. Upperclassmen, cafeteria workers, even the lady who stamps paperwork wanted to see the janitor in blue coveralls crunching numbers like he was changing light bulbs. Under the caption, "Why is he a janitor and not a teacher?" Praise popped up faster than notifications. Admiration for his calm reasoning. Requests to get him in a classroom. While the buzz grew, Miller pushed his squeaky metal cart past the locker rooms like every morning. He looked unfazed, checking thermostats and emergency lights, but every greeting carried something new. Respect mixed with awe. Some students waved, others whispered as they went by. Oliver watched from a distance, chest swelling with pride and tightening with the worry that all that spotlight could turn into a burden. In the teacher's lounge, the subject never changed. Coffee cups froze halfway to mouths whenever someone repeated, "Did you see it?" A veteran teacher confessed he'd never suspected the hidden talent. In a corner, Mrs. Davis, once chatty, stood stiff, fingers intertwined. Principal Amelia walked in unannounced, her face way too neutral for all the curiosity buzzing through the building. The office door opened for an odd request. They were calling Mr. Miller, the janitor who rarely spoke and never stepped into the spotlight. A few strides later, he showed up, posture calm, eyes alert like he already knew why. The principal got right to it. "The video going around stirred up a lot of questions, Mr. Miller. Mind if I ask a personal one?" He nodded. "You used to be a teacher, right?" A flicker of memory crossed his face. "I did. I taught math and a few other subjects." "Why'd you leave the classroom?" He dropped his gaze, voice barely above a whisper. "Something happened. After that, I decided to help where no one could see me." The principal leaned in, tone gentle. "Your calm and your grasp of the material have inspired our students, our staff, and, honestly, me too. Maybe the school needs you back in front of the class." Miller took a deep breath. "I never chased the spotlight. My goal's always been to serve quietly." "And you do. But some kids need exactly that quiet strength." Late that day, in an empty hallway, Oliver bumped into him. "Mr. Miller?" "Yes, Oliver." The boy held up his phone with the video playing. "Thanks, for showing what you know and for sticking around." Miller smiled, a small gesture that said more than words. Oliver walked off and the janitor stood there for a moment, feeling it might be time to reopen the door he'd thought was closed for good. "You don't have to raise your voice to make a difference," Miller said calmly. The hours after his talk with the principal didn't change the paint on the walls, but they shifted the vibe in the halls. Miller kept to his schedule, low-key, the key jingling in his coverall pocket. The new thing was the greetings. Teachers who used to rush by now stopped to give him a genuine "good morning." Some traded a few words, others just looked at him, as if a question was hanging there. Oliver was the most restless. He sensed gaps in the story and wanted to understand them out of respect. On Friday, he stopped at the supply room where Miller kept his tools. "Can I ask you something?" he ventured. Miller looked up, weighed the silence, and opened the door. The room was cramped, full of boxes, coiled cables, and the mixed smell of wood and metal, plus a hint of something that felt like the past. "Did you actually teach?" Oliver asked. Miller settled onto a low stool before answering. "I did, at a middle school nearby." "Why'd you leave?" He let his breath out slowly, like someone rummaging through a forgotten room. "I had everything. A devoted wife, a curious daughter, and a classroom I still miss today. Math for me was the clearest way to find order in the world's chaos." Miller paused. The distant sounds of recess seemed to set the beat for something yet to come. He paused again. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy curtain. Then came the accident. It was a cold morning. My daughter was crossing the street to get to school when a car came out of nowhere. It all happened in a blink. Oliver felt the air thicken but stayed quiet. "After that, I couldn't go back to teaching. I'd stare at the board and nothing made sense. The numbers lost their voice. I stepped away, disappeared. For a long time, I lived without a face, without a name." He ran a hand through his hair before going on. "Then they offered me this job. No lessons, no tests, no expectant eyes. Just tools, boxes, repairs. The routine set me back on track and I stayed close to the kids, even if it was from the wings. Oliver swallowed, searching for something to say. Do you ever wonder if it was worth it? Miller looked up. There was no sadness there, just a depth that pulled in anyone who met his eyes. It took me years to realize that everyone ends up finding their own corner of the world, sometimes way farther off than they planned. I don't regret giving up teaching. I just found a different way to stay alive. A soft knock broke the moment. The door cracked open, revealing a student from the class next door. Mr. Miller, could you help me with a math problem? They said you know your stuff. One quick glance said it all. Miller gave a small smile and stood. Sure, he replied, heading to the door like he was greeting an old friend. Oliver tucked that conversation away like a tiny flame. Blow too hard and it would go out. Show it to anyone and it would lose its meaning. He told no classmates, no group chats, not even his mom. It stayed between him and Mr. Miller, the slow-stepping, sharp-eyed custodian whose silence taught before any word. On Monday, a handwritten note showed up on the bulletin board. No official stamp from the office. Math help, Mr. Miller, Tuesdays, room 17 questions? No sign-up needed. Just drop by. No fanfare, no article, no speech. Even so, something shifted in the hallways. Whispered conversations circled around the note. Teachers looked at the custodian differently. Some students started to notice that authority lives outside the teacher's lounge, too. On Tuesday, 2 minutes before 3, Miller pushed open room 17. He pulled the desks into a big square, set down chalk, old worksheets, and a graph paper notebook in the middle, then sat with his hands on the table in no rush. The invitation was set. Oliver walked in first, returning the secret in the form of his presence. Next came a girl from 8th grade Class B, then 2 10th graders who usually dodged any extra activity. By 3:10, 8 students filled the chairs, eyes flicking between the custodian's notebook and their own doubts. Miller raised the chalk, wrote the first equation on the board and paused, just long enough for everyone to feel they could speak up. He turned his face to each student, giving the same brief welcome nod. With no grilling or superior tone, he opened his old notebook in the center of the table. He started talking with the calm of a hallway chat. Logical steps, full examples. A pause whenever someone frowned. The board began to make sense. During the break, a murmur reached Oliver. With this guy, it clicks right away. 3 weeks stuck, and today I finally saw it. The news spread faster than the bell. In the halls, thanks were offered with the ease reserved for real authority. Thanks, Mr. Miller, some said. Others just raised a hand. But the light in their eyes said enough. Teachers who used to stride past him like he was a locker now made room and gave a sincere smile. The shift didn't escape Mrs. Seabart. She believed in strict discipline, clear orders, safe distance. Suddenly, this man of few words was dismantling the old setup, showing that teaching might be, above all, listening and decoding silence. Discomfort stayed with her for 2 days until she decided to face it. She found him in the maintenance room, tightening a crooked shelf. Mr. Miller. He looked up and set the tool aside. Yes? I came to thank you, and also to apologize. He met her gaze, calm. For what? For the comment I made in front of the class. I thought it was just a joke, but I crossed the line. Miller took a deep breath before answering. Mistakes show us what we still can't see. I don't take it personally. The weight she carried seemed to lift. What if we taught a class together? The way you explain things reaches places I can't. He tilted his head, thinking, until a small smile appeared. That's a possibility. At the doorway, Oliver watched the scene, feeling something grow that words couldn't hold. The kid who used to shrink in the back row didn't live there anymore. From Miller, he learned fractions, sure, but also how to notice the ones who speak softly and still change destinies. When the week ended and the hallway emptied out, Oliver went back to room 17 by himself. He was carrying a plain little box. Inside were a fountain pen and a short note. Thanks for showing that strength can be quiet, too. He set the gift on the desk without signing it. Before he left, he gave the clean board one last look, like someone who knows some lessons keep going even after the bell. Then he closed the door, set on taking that strong silence wherever he went. Every Tuesday, room 17 came to life. 4, sometimes 10 students would walk in, each at their own pace. Some stayed an hour, others only a moment. Inside, there were no tests and no rankings. You could ask questions or just listen to the echo of your own thoughts. Mr. Miller welcomed everybody the same way, whether they were fighting for a C or racking up straight A's. He listened, tossed out questions that turned into keys, and let each person find the next step. Oliver never missed a session. When Miller was busy, he'd lean over a newcomer's notebook, realizing he was useful beyond the role of student. One late afternoon, a 7th grader whispered, "Is Miller just the janitor?" Oliver smiled. "He's whatever we need if you pay attention." That's how Miller Hour was born. It wasn't on any schedule, but word spread that in there, you could get your confidence in your own thinking back. Miller never advertised a thing. Mrs. Amelia just walked past the door and approved with a smile. During one of those hours, Rose, always quiet, raised her hand. "I thought I was terrible at math. Turns out I just think differently." Miller replied, "Thinking differently is a talent." Later, with the room empty, Oliver asked how he made the place feel so safe. Miller gathered the chalk stubs, shrugged, and said, "I don't need to prove I know more. I want them to dare to ask." The words hung in the air, a promise that the best part of the conversation was still coming. Next morning, a post showed up on the school forum. Learning from Others Week, special guest in room 17. The idea was Mrs. Amelia's. Craftspeople, parents, and alumni would speak throughout the week. On the last day, Mr. Miller. He frowned. "I'm no good at speeches." "It's not a speech," Amelia said. "Talk about what you've lived, how you think now, and why you're still here." Miller didn't answer. That night he sat in the kitchen in front of a blank sheet of paper. Beside it lay his old exercise notebook. He flipped through it, sketches, formulas, and in the middle, a worn note in his daughter's handwriting. "Dad, today I understood math. You're the best." He closed the notebook. He knew what he would say. The last night of the week arrived. Posters in the auditorium carried students' words. Asking is courage. Math can be quiet. Sometimes all we need is someone who listens. Chairs in rows, empty stage. Parents, teachers, and students packed the room. Mrs. Amelia spoke. "We've talked about learning all week. Tonight we're talking about trust, the kind that changes more than words." She pointed to the side door. Mr. Miller walked in slowly. He wore his work overalls, a clean shirt, no papers in his hands, just his presence. The silence felt like the first note of a song nobody knew yet. He climbed the stage slowly and stopped in front of the first row. He didn't lock eyes with anyone, but everyone felt he was talking to them. "You see me with a bucket and a broom and think, janitor. For a long time I thought that label was enough." He took a deep breath, looking for the right words. "Before that, I was a math teacher. I clung to numbers because they bring order to what looks chaotic." Students leaned forward. Oliver, in the third row, sat frozen. Then the unthinkable happened. My daughter was gone, and with her the ground that held me up. The auditorium seemed to shrink. I found I couldn't stand in front of a blackboard anymore. He ran a hand over his cap, a simple gesture that broke the tension. I found shelter in the hallways, between classes, and fixing broken things. I didn't need to talk, just be there. A heavy silence settled. I never asked to be heard again. But your kids, curious as only they can be, pulled me back. They didn't ask who I was, they asked what I knew and why I was keeping it to myself. He took a step forward. Today they don't call me teacher, and that doesn't hurt. I learned the title matters less than being useful. Everyone carries something that can help someone else if there's room for stumbles. Sometimes all it takes is holding the door open so someone dares to walk in. Expectation hung in the air, like everyone was waiting for the next equation to be solved. The first applause was timid. Then it rolled into a wave. Students on their feet, parents next, teachers last. It wasn't noise, it was recognition. Mrs. Amelia crossed the aisle, took Mr. Miller's hand, and thanked him for the silence between his sentences. On the way out, a small procession formed. Parents greeted him. Some only smiled, others touched his shoulder. An 8-year-old girl handed him a card. "You're my favorite teacher, even without a blackboard." Miller tucked the drawing away like crystal. Oliver walked beside him. He said nothing, but his eyes asked everything. On Monday, the school felt brighter. Students waved, co-workers held doors, The secretary, famous for one-word replies, managed a full "good morning." Miller answered while checking heaters, tightening doorknobs, picking up papers. The modest stage where he feels useful. In the afternoon, Amelia called him into her office. Steam curled up from the tea on the table. "Your words touched everyone," she said. He waved it off. "What matters shows up when no one forces it," he insisted. Then she shared the news. The department was thinking about creating a formal position for him. A teaching assistant focused on one-on-one support. A step that still had no name, as quiet as the pause between his talks, yet already able to get people on their feet. He kept his eyes on her, thinking, "It's a big gesture, but am I really the right person?" "You already do that job. You listen, you explain, you're here without asking for anything," she replied. Miller picked up the paper, ran his eyes over the lines, and set it back on the table. "I'm grateful, but I don't need the title. I found my spot between the tools, the closet, and the board. If I can serve there, I'm happy." "I understand," she said, "but I have to put it on record. Your presence changes more than you realize." The next morning, a note showed up taped to the office door. No stamps, no letterhead, just a short notice. Math help desk. Professor Miller, room 17, open hours. Below, in Miller's tiny handwriting, "Sometimes one good idea is enough." Oliver read it and smiled. He understood that Miller hadn't refused. He just said yes in another language. Hours later, a new face turned up in the hallway. Michael, 14, restless eyes, walked into room 17 with a dog-eared notebook. "Can I?" "Sure," Miller answered. Michael sat down and opened the notebook, showing crossed-out problems. "I can't get any of them right," he muttered. Miller flipped through the pages. "Then let's start with what you already know. What if I don't know anything?" "I doubt that," Miller said calmly. "And even if that were true, we can build it together, brick by brick." Michael looked up, puzzled. The clock said the help session had just begun, but for him it felt like the first minute math could turn into conversation. Michael listened to everything with his eyes down. When he got up, he squared his shoulders. Oliver, stacking exams by the door, whispered, "I don't know how you do it, but it makes a difference." Miller put his pen away. "I do what I can. Sometimes that's enough." Later, the nearly empty hallway echoed. Thursday was giving way to night. The staff had already left, and the last beam of sunlight shot through the windows. Miller swept the first floor at his usual pace, but his steps seemed lighter. Room 17's door was ajar. Inside, the silence felt alert. On the board, a sentence that wasn't his. "Thanks for showing it's not necessary to shout to be heard." Under it, notes in different inks. "Now I make mistakes without fear. I found out I can add. Patience teaches too. For the first time, I trust myself." Miller stepped closer, grabbed a piece of chalk, and after a moment drew a line under all the messages. On it he wrote, "Trust is the starting point." He erased nothing. The next morning, the room was packed. Students in their seats, teachers leaning against the walls. Principal Amelia walked in, read the board, and met Miller's eyes. "What was born here is special." He shrugged, almost smiling. "I just left the door open." "Even so," she said. "A lot of people had been waiting for that." That quiet morning, Oliver looked up at the board covered in chalk scribbles and tossed out an unexpected idea. "What if we never erased any of this again?" The class laughed, but Mr. Miller nodded yes. That's how that rectangle of slate became the trust board, an open space for any hand to leave a note, a question, or a breath of courage. In the weeks that followed, math lines shared space with whispered confessions and bottled-up questions. On Tuesdays, Miller sat at a desk in the back, waiting for whoever showed up. Some days only 2 students. On others, 20 packed the room. The equation stayed, but the talk changed. They spoke about test anxiety, fights at home, dreams too big to fit in a backpack. It was on a rainy afternoon that a first-year boy finally spoke up. He stood, fussing with his shoelace, and asked in almost a whisper, "Why are you so kind if hardly anyone noticed you before?" Miller didn't hesitate. "Because I spent a long time being invisible," he answered, "and that hurts." The boy took it in like someone learning a magic trick. Then he walked to the board, took a deep breath, and wrote, "I want to be someone who knows how to listen." Staring at those letters still dusty and wet, everyone realized the real lesson wasn't in the numbers, but in the chance to see the other person before the eraser comes and wipes everything away. With the school calendar down to its last little squares, Principal Amelia floated an idea that left everyone silent. Why not give Room 17 a new name? There would be no speeches, no ribbon cutting, just a simple wooden sign above the door. Miller Room, for learning in quiet with an open heart. Simple, direct, impossible to ignore. When he heard the proposal, Professor Miller adjusted his glasses, as if buying time to grasp his own importance. After 2 decades teaching there, he nodded slowly and murmured, "This is more than I ever hoped for." That afternoon, when the final bell rang, Oliver waited for the teacher to put away his books, wiped the board, and walked him to the gate. They went side by side, letting the silence speak what mattered. Already on the sidewalk, Oliver took a deep breath. "You taught me more than all the others put together." Miller raised his eyebrows, flashed a smile warm as winter sun, and answered, "And you reminded me it's never too late to be needed again." He then turned back. The hallway he had walked for years felt different. Every step left a soft, almost glowing trail, as if the school itself wanted to carve that moment into the worn tile floor. For today, we closed the door of the Miller Room, but only until the next lesson. If this story made sense to you, leave your comment, share it with someone who needs to remember the power of being needed, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together. See you soon, and may every step you take from now on leave its own trail of light.